Welcome everyone to a tier list. This one is for all the Nightmare frames in Code Geass Lost Stories global version for April 2024. And even though it's been 2 months since the last tier list, we didn't get too many new Nightmare frames since then, so this won't be a huge update, but still, we gotta go through it. So let's rank all the Nightmare frames. I didn't change any of the tiers because I don't think I have to at this time, so let's get started. So first we have is the Lancelot, obviously S tier, 3 different weapons, the Varus, the shield, and the mass vibration blades, or swords, sorry, swords not blades. I mean, sword is a blade, but you know what I'm saying. Point is, you got 3 different weapons, all of them are really good. The Varus is obviously the best one, and even though it doesn't do fixed damage, still doing a multiplier on 5 enemies in range is really powerful, and that's why the Lancelot is still in the S tier in my opinion. Moving on, we have is the normal Glasgow, niche use only. Its cost is 2 if you fully upgrade it, which you shouldn't by the way, but if you did it would be 2, and that's pretty useful if you don't have say Kallen's Glasgow or Nightmare frames like that, which is why this thing belongs in the niche tier, even though aside from the low cost it is pure garbage. Moving on, we have is the Glasgow Night Police, also niche use only. I'd say it's probably better than the normal Glasgow because the shield can be somewhat useful for certain defensive pilots like Senba for example. That was a very old combo back in the day, but still you could use that if you're just starting out in the game. Other than that though, it's not that great. At least it has low deployment costs like the normal Glasgow, which is why I think niche use only seems appropriate. Next is Kallen's Glasgow, gonna put in the S tier. The best part about this Nightmare frame, besides the fact that it costs nothing to deploy if you fully upgrade it, is the fact that it combos with all the really good Kallens we have in the game that activate their effects upon deployment. We have the cost increasers and the buffers, and we'll get even more down the road. And that's why this Glasgow is really powerful and will still be S tier for months to come because we're going to keep getting really powerful Kallens. Moving on, we have is the Sutherland. This is the one that you have to purchase, so obviously garbage, no Nightmare frame special. You guys already know how I feel about those type of Nightmare frames, so yeah, this belongs in the garbage tier. Next we have is the Sutherland. This is the Purist edition or version. Oh, I say edition, it's not a thing you buy, it's a version. I'll put it in the B tier. I really like me some Sutherlands, but gonna be honest, right now in the game I think there's just better options available to you, especially budget options, so therefore the Sutherland is not as good as it once was, but still you got 2 cool weapons, the long range and of course the melee weapon which stuns. It's got low deployment cost and the special is decent, but at least the range is really solid, so good when you start, but I think there's just better options right now in the game. Moving on, we have is the Gloucester. This is the one you have to purchase. Again, garbage, no Nightmare frame special, so why would you ever use it or waste your money on it when there's better things in the store? Moving on, we have is Cornelia's Gloucester, S tier. Gonna put that probably after Kallen's Glasgow. Yeah, that's fine. It's got really high attack power for a lance. The buff it received made it even better than before, which is why it still belongs in S tier and will be higher than other Nightmare frames on this list, which might surprise you because again, that buff is really good, or increases the blocks and it does more damage. Not more damage, it attacks more enemies at one time. So you know what? Maybe I'll actually put it above Kallen's Glasgow because the cost is still 4, so that's pretty good. Yeah, I'm gonna put it actually above Kallen's Glasgow because of that recent buff. Moving on, we have is the Glaston Knight's Gloucester. We're gonna put this in a solid tier. This is now a Nightmare frame you don't have to pay for anymore because we just got Claudio in the game, and therefore I think A tier is appropriate. The long range, or I should say just the range of the long range weapon, there we go, is a little hard to get used to at first, but if you utilize it correctly, it's actually a really deadly weapon. And of course, the lance is not bad either, but for me, it's the range weapon that sells this Nightmare frame. I don't think it's the best range weapon in the game, even within the A tier itself, but it's still really good, and I'm happy we can finally get this thing without having to spend our own money. Okay, moving on, we have is Guilford's Gloucester. Again, I'm gonna put in the B tier. I think it's worse than your standard Sutherland, but still it's pretty solid. The lance is actually really good because it costs, I believe it's 2 to deploy if you fully upgraded, which makes it useful for cost increasers, of course, and the melee weapon can get the 270 attack power if you fully upgraded, which again could be really useful if you don't have any other options available to you, which is why I think it belongs in the B tier. Moving on, we have is Darlton's Gloucester. Gonna put this in the A tier, probably above the Glaston Night Gloucester for a couple of reasons. One, the range of the cannon is still really good even with the Lancelot flight enabled version now in the game, and the lance weapon is also really powerful and will become even better after the first year anniversary boost. So yeah, Darlton's Gloucester, it's still really good. Moving on, we have is Zero's Burai. Gonna put that in A tier above everything else here. I usually have this thing in S tier, but right now I just don't think it belongs there anymore, especially now we have the Lancelot flight enabled version from the Nightmare Frame boss battle event in the game. Since that attacks 2 enemies at once, has more attack power, and the cost is relatively lower. So that Nightmare Frame makes this one not as good anymore. But keep in mind that Zero's Burai still has the fastest range of attack in the game, and it cloaks on special, and the special damage is also really good, which also includes its range. But that high deployment cost really hurts this Nightmare Frame, and that's why it's in the A tier now and not the S tier. Moving on, we have is the normal Burai. This is the one you get from completing several missions, and again it's garbage. I'll put it above the other ones if it lets me, but yeah, there's no special, and while attack power I think is slightly higher than a normal Sutherland Purist version, and again it has no special. That's the problem with it. So garbage. Moving on, we have is Tohdoh's Burai Kai. I'll about to say Gekka. No, not that one. Good when you start. I'll put it, yeah, that's fine actually. It's an okay Nightmare Frame. The special's pretty good. It buffs everyone in the JLF, but it has such low attack power, and while it does have high defense, I don't think it makes up for it, because right now in the game, that attack power is just unacceptable right now. So I really like the Nightmare Frame when it first came out in the game, meaning when the game actually first came out, not yeah, that's what I meant to say. I hope you understand what I'm saying there. The point is, it was good once, it ain't good anymore, but I suppose if you start playing the game right now and you pick it up, I think it's worth upgrading it at least maybe the first 3 or 4 remodels, and then after that, stop using it and get something better, and they're really better options, of course. Moving on, we have is the Burai Kai. This is the JLF version, and this one I have a lot of mixed feelings about, because if you're whaling, you'll get it in the first month. If you're not whaling, it'll take you months to get it, and by the time you do get it, you'll probably have picked up better options, assuming you're playing the game consistently. For example, the Gekka would be something that comes to mind. So because of that, I'm putting it in the garbage tier, but I'll put it in high garbage. It was really good when we didn't have the Gekkas, but now that we have the Gekkas, it's just not good anymore, especially when you consider the fact that Asahina and Nagisa are both rank 3s. They're not hard to acquire, and as long as you have 2 or 3 upgraded Gekkas, that's all you'll need for the rest of the game. So therefore, this Nightmare Frame, it's not that great, so garbage tier indeed. Next we have is the Burai Disel. I'm going to put this in the B tier above everything else. You get it from completing the Chapter 4 missions. Of course, if you just start playing this game, you won't get it that way. You'll have to wait until they re-release it again, although they have been pretty good on this, because we got in the Chapter 4 release. I think it was a couple months ago, they re-released the exclusive MC Nightmare Frames, so that was the Burai Disel, the Sougetsu, and the Sutherland Custom. So you had 2 opportunities to get this Nightmare Frame already, and there will be a third one as well, assuming you don't want to pay. If you want to pay, you can get it right now, but I'm talking about getting it for free. Putting that all aside, the high attack power, low deployment cost, and really good special put it above the rest of the Nightmare Frames so far mentioned in the B tier. Moving on, we have is the MR1, very niche use only. It's got low deployment cost. That's about it. Other than that, not that great. Next we have is Kallen's Burai. I'm going to put it in the B tier. I'll put it above Tohdoh's Gekka. I'm sorry, Burai Kai, but that's as far as it goes. It's a weird Nightmare Frame because special is not that great, although it has really good range, like Kallen's Glasgow. The deployment cost is not that high, but it still feels kind of high if you want to use it with, say, pilots like Jeremiah. So it's in a very weird place where it's not that good, but it's also not that bad either, which is why I think the B tier is appropriate. Moving on, we have is the Galahad. I'm going to put this in A tier, probably above everything else. This has the highest melee attack in the game. It's a boss killer, both in the hard missions and of course in the actual Nightmare Frame boss battle event. It's really powerful in arena mode to help you take out the annoying towers, and overall just a really powerful Nightmare Frame. The only issue with it is that it has a very high cost, but for most people you can easily work around this. Moving on, we have with the Tristan, easy S tier. Gonna put this probably I'll say above the Glasgow, or before the Glasgow, and also before Cornelia's Gloucester. Yeah, that's fine. The Tristan's really good because the base range can support other pilots that are working together. The special covers an insane amount of ground, attacks 3 enemies. It's got really good defense, really good attack power, like just base attack power. Just all around one of the best Night frames in the game for sure. Again, what were they thinking with that special? Oh my god. Okay, next is the Mordred. I'm going to put this above everything else because that base range is just so solid. The special comes in handy all the time and attacks 3 enemies at once. Great for healers, great for annihilators, great all around nightmare frame, and just one of the best in the game. The only problem I have with it is the really high deployment cost, but in most cases, just like the Galahad, you can work around it. Next we have is the Percival. I'm going to put it in S tier. It's arguably the best lance in the game. In fact, I'm going to put it above Cornelia's Gloucester just because right now I still think it's better. Higher base attack power, is a float unit which does come in handy all the time, and the actual special ability, while it doesn't have a bunch of extra effects like Cornelia's Gloucester, the multiplier is better, so you can do way more damage. And again, this is a lance with 300 attack power that was free to acquire. So yeah, definitely gets an S tier rank from me. Moving on, we have is the Lancelot Club. Gonna put this in the A tier. I'm gonna put this above the Glaston Night Gloucester, but I would say before everything else. And the reason why is that while I think it's really good, the low attack power does bug me a lot. But this thing does have an extra block, which the rest of the lances don't seem to have, aside from Bradley's Nightmare Frame. The stunning ability is actually really good and will come into play in the really harder missions. And of course, it combos really well with Knotted Anagram. So it's a weird situation where it has decent stats, but that extra block and stun ability are actually really good, which is why I think it belongs in the A tier. Moving on, we have is the Florence. Gonna put this also in the A tier, but I'll put it at the very end. It attacks 2 enemies at once, it cloaks on special, and I believe the special itself also attacks 2 enemies at once, and it has 270 attack power. The only problem with this Nightmare Frame is that it can't block, which is why it's lower from the A tier. It's still really solid, and in combination with something like a defensive pilot, say Kallen or Suzaku or even Guilford, it's really powerful, and that's why I think it belongs in the A tier. Next we have is the Palomides. This is going to surprise a lot of you, but I'm going to put this in A tier. Yeah, I think it's actually not that bad. I'll even put it above the Glaston Night Gloucester, and this is why. It attacks 2 enemies at once. It's a budget float unit that has a ranged weapon. It has 300 base attack, and at least the special range is the same as Sutherland. The only problem with this damn thing is that the base range is a cross, which if you don't use it correctly can be really bad. But if you're really smart with this thing, it's not the worst Nightmare Frame ever. I was very harsh on this thing when it came out. I'm still harsh on it now, but in the current meta of the game, which is what these Nightmare Frame tier lists are for, I think it's actually pretty good. I just wish that base range was better, and I also wish on the Japanese side they would give it fixed damage to make it more relevant in the current meta, which I know they never will because they suck. Moving on, we have the Guren MK-2, S tier of course. Gonna put this, yeah, that's about right. High S tier. Attacks 5 enemies on special, 240 attack power, really high defense, has an extra block. What else can you ask for? This thing is so good at cleaning up the garbage, especially in the harder missions where the enemies just keep piling up on you. And of course, in combination with the defensive Kallen, this is one of the best Nightmare Frames in the game, period. That's why it's in the S tier. Moving on, we have is the Sougetsu. Gonna put this in the A tier. I'm gonna put it probably above the Galahad. While the attack power is significantly less, and it also attacks less enemies on special, it still deals fixed damage and also attacks 2 enemies on special, so that's pretty good. It's basically a weaker version of the Guren MK-2, which means it's pretty powerful if you look at it from that perspective. And again, I really like the fact that it deals fixed damage. Moving on, we have is the Sutherland Custom, easy S tier. Gonna put this baby probably, I'd say right here. That's probably a good spot for it. 300 base attack power for the range attack, same special as the Lancelot, and the Lance stuns, which is really good, and also has a low deployment cost for it, or low cost that will be added to your deployment cost. Really good stuff, and it was free to acquire, so obviously it's gonna be in the S tier. Moving on, we have is Tohdoh's Gekka. I'm gonna put S tier. Still one of the best Nightmare Frames in the game, deals the most amount of damage, even though it only attacks 2 enemies at a time, and the range is so unique that if you're creative with the game, you can cover a lot of ground, and just like the Tristan, you can support multiple pilots, again, if you're smart with how you deploy it on the battlefield. Also, it's got really good defense, and it combos really well with the defense of Tohdoh. So overall, Tohdoh's Gekka is just such a powerful nightmare frame, and if you have it, you should definitely be using it. Moving on, we have the normal Gekkas. Gonna put these in the A tier. They're very solid. I'll put it probably above the Glaston Night Gloucester because it doesn't deal fixed damage, but it does have extra blocks, which is good for defensive pilots. 215 attack power and combos really well with Asahina and really anyone else in the JLF, which is really good for budget players. That's why I'm going to put it in the A tier. They're kind of like mini Guren MK-2s or even mini Sougetsus, which is never a bad thing. Okay, moving on, we have is the Shen Hu. Gonna put also in the S tier, and where to put it is always kind of difficult for me, but you know what? I think I like where it's currently at. It's got 300 attack power, an extra block, it's a float unit, the melee attack power is really good, especially the interval of attack, and the special is not bad. The only thing about this I don't like is the fact that the range for both the base and the special is only one spot ahead of you, which means that while you can deal a lot of damage, you can only attack enemies that are directly in front of you, which sometimes is really annoying, which is why I prefer the lances over this thing. But with certain Nightmare Frame pilots, you can easily mitigate this, like the C2 that came out that has the Lazy Witch C2, the one's wearing Lucius clothing, and pilots like that. So overall, it's really good, but I just think there's way better stuff in the S tier. But still, it's S tier for a reason. Okay, next is the Lancelot Flight Enabled version. I'll put it right here, because while the base range and special range is worse than your standard Lancelot, the fact that this thing deals fixed damage, attacks 3 enemies on special, and 2 at a time normally puts it, I think, above the regular Lancelot. Plus the melee weapon is definitely a lot better, especially the range of that thing, which is absolutely insane to me. So taking those things into consideration, the Lancelot Flight Enabled version is better. Is it hard to use in certain situations? Yes, but if you are creative, you can make it work. And plus the range of this thing is absolutely insane, the best in the game. So that's why it belongs in the S tier. Next we have is the Gawain. I'm gonna put this in the A tier. I don't know, I guess here is fine. The problem with the Gawain is that the attack power is only 270 and the special is great, but it has to charge. The base range is fine. You have to work a little harder to make it work. And unlike the Palomides, like I said, you have to wait for this thing to charge passively. Certain pilots like C2 can mitigate this with their own abilities, but most pilots don't have that, so it's okay. It'll be much better with the melee weapon, but for now, I think it's A tier. It's solid. It's not a bad nightmare frame, and the special's really good, but I just think right now there's better options in the game, and it's still very hard to use. Moving on, we have is the Panzer Hummel. Put niche use only, but like the top niche use only, because it has relatively low cost, but it stuns on special. The range is kind of stupid, but you can make it work in situations, and because it has a really low cost, it combos well with other pilots that either increase your cost, buff or debuff enemies, or some combination of those things. So that's why I think it belongs in a niche use only. If you don't use it for its low cost, it's not that great. Moving on, we have is the new nightmare frame we're getting in the boss event, the Lancelot Flight Enabled version with the Sutherland arm. Obviously S tier, no doubt about that. Gonna put this probably above the custom. Nah, I'll say right below the custom. It's just a weaker version of the Lancelot Flight Enabled version without the secondary weapon. The range is fantastic, doesn't deal fixed damage, but who cares? In this point of the game, that's not that relevant. It's just so awesome to have a budget version of the Lancelot Flight Enabled version that anyone can get access to. So that's why it's up there. It's just such a powerful nightmare frame. And last, and certainly not least, is the Siegfried, which in my opinion is the second best nightmare frame in the game. And the reason why is it has really high defense, really high attack power, is a lance, the special is absolutely insane, and yes, most of the time you'll never hit all the enemies within the yellow spots because it covers so much ground, but I like how at a base level it attacks in front of you and the sides of you. It's like a T across attack, if you will. That alone makes this thing really powerful. Did I mention it has really high defense? Anza Lance? Yeah, this thing is really good. Arguably better than Tohdoh's Gekka, but I kind of like how that thing's range is a little more helpful in most situations. For this thing, it's not as good. But you can go back and forth. Both these Nightmare frames are just really OP. And both deal fixed damage, which as you guys know is super powerful and is currently meta in the game now and will be meta for a very long time. There you guys have it. That is my tier list for all the Nightmare frames in Geass Lost Stories global version for April 2024. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you're curious, I also ranked all the pilots in Geass Lost Stories for April 2024, and you can check out that video right here.